So where is the will to change this in either party?
It's not there, and that's why the solution, our founders gave us a great solution, Neil. They gave us what's called an Article 5 Convention of the States, where if 34 states come together and say, hey, you know, the federal government didn't create the states created the federal government, and by the way, you're spending our future of our kids and our present-day income, and we think it ought to change.
Senator Tom Coburn was an unusual man in all the best ways. He did something most politicians in Washington would never dream of doing. After a decades-long career in the private sector, Dr. Coburn was elected to the House of Representatives in 1994, pledging to serve no more than 3 terms, a promise he kept.
I'm a member of a freshman class that wants to change this institution, and we're going to change it. The American public is not going to continue to listen to the status quo in Washington if my freshman colleagues have their way.
Congressman Coburn returned to his home state of Oklahoma in 2000, only for his constituents to send him back to Congress, this time to the Senate, 4 years later. Once again, he self-imposed term limits, vowing to step down after only 2 terms.
I absolutely believe in term limits, and the reason I believe in term limits is that you don't fall into the trap of thinking about your political career at the expense of the very constituency that you're supposed to represent.
For most politicians, at least those who daydream about taking up a permanent vacation residency in Congress, 2 terms is barely enough to finish the prologue to their multi-volume autobiography. I mean, Bill Clinton was only 54 when he left office, and he still managed to write an autobiography that made War and Peace look like light weekend reading. Just wait until Mitch McConnell writes his. But for this senator, even 2 terms was too much time in office.
Dr. Coburn, you're elected to the Senate, and then you said, that's enough. Tell us about that.
With 2 years left to go, and a growing realization that Congress was too hopelessly drunk on power to limit itself,
I came to the conclusion after 10 years that what's wrong with our country isn't going to get fixed by the career politicians in the Senate or the House.
Senator Tom Coburn made the stunning decision to walk away.
Everyone wants Washington to change, and that means changing everyone in Washington.
But that wasn't the end of Coburn's career. Ever reticent about himself, the senator never would have dreamed of writing an autobiography with a subtly conceited title like My Life. But he did write a few books exposing the corruption and dysfunction he had witnessed in Congress. He knew from first-hand experience, he wrote, that our nation's problems have been created because career politicians have set themselves apart as an elite class of people trying to dictate to us how we run our lives. And if the ruling class created those problems, it certainly couldn't be expected to fix them. What the nation needed, Coburn realized, was an outside, external solution. That's why he joined Convention of States, a nationwide grassroots movement to call an Article 5 convention to propose amendments limiting federal spending, power, and terms of office. Bipartisan areas of reform that Senator Coburn knew the career politicians in Washington would never touch. Convention of States, which relies on a little-known second option for proposing amendments, an interstate convention under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, aims to impose term limits not only on members of Congress, but also on staffers and bureaucrats, and even the judiciary, effectively dismantling the reign of careerists in America. Coburn, seeing no other way to reform Congress, offered his enthusiastic support. The question is how, in a country like America of all places, men like Coburn ever became so rare. He should be the rule, not the exception. Instead, we're living under a government of, by, and for the ruling class, where the voice of the people barely penetrates the ironclad halls of power. If ever you've watched the news and wondered why politicians who seem incapable of making basic decisions for themselves wield the power to make decisions for millions of Americans, You need to hear this story. This is the story of the ruling class. The modern debate about term limits may seem like a new issue, but it's not. In fact, it's foundational to our very understanding of government. Throughout history, many have argued that government is the province of kings, a divine right that's passed down from one generation to the next, or confirmed by some mythical, supernatural sign of God's favor.
The Lady of the Lake, her arm clad in the purest shimmering samite, held aloft Excalibur from the bosom of the water, signifying by divine providence that I, Arthur, was to carry Excalibur. That is why I'm your king.
Other theories of government move closer to the people, but still hold that the masses are too uneducated to make responsible decisions for themselves, and therefore should entrust those decisions to a more experienced, intellectual elite. Those two views discount the need for term limits entirely. A third view, however, suggests that no one, not a king, not the elite, not even the masses, can be trusted to wield unlimited authority over their fellow man. According to this view, the responsibility of government is seen neither as a personal prerogative nor divine sanction, but as an opportunity to serve, humbly and selflessly to represent the views of the governed. Political philosophers as ancient as Aristotle have argued that truly democratic leaders must arise from the masses and return to the masses. The basis of a democratic state is liberty, Aristotle wrote, and one principle of liberty is for all to rule and be ruled in turn. Throughout history, very few rulers have accepted this notion. Most have instead viewed power as something to be lorded over their subjects. But there was one man, a very powerful man at that, who openly challenged this theory. Jesus Christ claimed to be the Son of God, but unlike other men who claimed to be divinely favored, Jesus never lived in a castle. He never sought to amass political power. He never even hired legions of armed servants to do his bidding. Instead, he taught his disciples that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. This is the basis of what we call servant leadership, and it radically inverted the traditional understanding of government. It matters not whether you received a shiny sword from a rock, nor whether your great-grandpappy claimed to have tea with Letitia, the sun goddess. The only legitimate claim to authority is the consent of the governed.
Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony.
In 1660, John Milton, author of the epic poem Paradise Lost, wrote that in order to fulfill Christ's commands, public officials should strive to be perpetual servants, serve at their own cost, walk the streets as other men, and be spoken to freely, familiarly, friendly, without adoration. While Milton believed that a permanent legislature could be consistent with this view, he conceded that if it be feared that long continuance of power may corrupt sincerest men, the known expedient would be what he called partial rotation. Around that same time, John Locke, whose views on government deeply influenced the founders, wrote in his second treatise of government that a legislature should not always be in session, permitting representatives to return into the ordinary state of subjects. These ideas bled over into the American Revolution, with many early leaders arguing either for fixed term limits or some form of partial rotation. According to the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was written by George Mason, government officials may be restrained from oppression by feeling the burdens of the people, and should at fixed periods be reduced to a private station and return into that body from whence they were originally taken. Term limits, one anti-federalist wrote, merely force elected officials to become better acquainted with the condition and politics of their constituents. Even good men, another anti-federalist added, in time imperceptibly lose sight of the people. Politicians aren't any more corrupt by nature than the rest of us, but here's a little secret about human behavior. Those who don't fraternize with everyday, normal people tend to become a bit eccentric. Arrogance clouds their judgments. With no one around to keep them grounded, they tend to float off into psychedelic la-la land. Nowhere is this better seen than in the celebrity entertainment space, where the rich and the powerful show up to supposedly high-class events dressed like Dr. Seuss characters or the Jabberwocky. Politicians are no different. They just mask it better. Without rotation in office, Congress is merely the suit and tie equivalent of the Met Gala. No one class of people is any more crooked than another. We all need a healthy helping of real life to keep our feet on the ground and our egos in check. That's why the vast majority of the founders believed that public service should be temporary. The gateway to Congress, or any governing body, should be a revolving door, not a portcullis. It was the very palladium, or safeguard, of civil liberty, George Mason argued at the Constitutional Convention, that the great officers of state should at fixed periods return to that mass from which they were at first taken, in order that they may feel and respect those rights and interests which are again to be personally valuable to them. Benjamin Franklin agreed. In free governments, the rulers are the servants, he said, and the people their superiors and sovereigns. For the former, therefore, to return among the latter was not to degrade, but to promote them. Franklin makes an interesting point. In America, we like to say, the people are in charge. If that's true, politicians should actually want to leave office. After all, wouldn't they have more power as private citizens? Serving in Congress was meant to be a burden, a chore, an act of self-denial, not self-promotion. No one better exemplified this extreme reluctance to serve than George Washington. In his first inaugural address, Washington made it clear he didn't really want to serve, and he didn't think he was qualified either. But, he said, his country had summoned him, and for that reason alone, he would serve. Washington set the voluntary tradition of stepping down after only 2 terms. But for many of his predecessors, not even that was good enough. While the anti-federalists outright opposed the Constitution due to its lack of fixed term limits, men like Thomas Jefferson pushed for its adoption despite their grave concerns. Across various letters, the author of the Declaration, who had been absent from the Constitutional Convention, blasted the proposed document's abandonment in every instance of the necessity of rotation in office as a cruel distress to our country. In fact, Jefferson, who was more outspoken about term limits than Washington was, has been identified by some as the true father of the 2-term custom. Subsequently, presidents including Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison, and Rutherford B. Hayes wanted Congress to pass a constitutional amendment limiting the president to a single term. Although a handful of presidents, including Ulysses S. Grant, Teddy Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson, flirted with the possibility of a 3rd term, Washington's precedent endured, at least until World War II, when Franklin D. Roosevelt blew past the unofficial limits, winning 4 consecutive presidential elections.
And that, Lauren, is how FDR ruined this country.
Needless to say, not everyone was thrilled about Roosevelt's infraction. That's why 4 terms, or 16 years, is the most dangerous threat to our freedom ever proposed by anybody, Roosevelt's opponent, Thomas Dewey, warned. That's one reason I believe, with our great presidents of the past, that 2 terms must be established as the limits by constitutional amendments. In response, that's exactly what Congress did, proposing an amendment, the 22nd Amendment, that would finally cement Washington's long-standing tradition. Speaking of Roosevelt, one of the president's New Deal proponents in Congress was a man by the name of John David Dingell, Sr. Roosevelt and Dingell were both elected in 1932, Roosevelt to the presidency, Dingell to the House of Representatives. But while Roosevelt hasn't been in office for over 80 years, Dingell never left office. I had the opportunity to sit down with Convention of States staff writer Matthew May, who previously served as an intern for John Dingell Jr.
I was born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan, and for the entirety of my time there, my representative was John Dingell Jr., and he had been in Congress since 1955. But the story actually started with his father, John D. Dingell Sr., who was elected to the House of Representatives in 1932. And he was a member of the House until 1955. John Dingell Jr., he grew up in Washington, literally a child of Washington. In fact, he was on the floor of the House of Representatives as a page when Franklin Roosevelt gave his famous Day of Infamy speech. And so in 55, he won the special election to fill his father's seat. As you might guess, the Dingell name carried great weight in the district. And so he really didn't have to campaign. He was never really seriously challenged for his seat. He kept winning and kept winning and kept winning. And so as you know, in the House, the more seniority you have, the more power you gather. And by the time I came to be an intern with him, which was in the summer of 1993 in his district office in Dearborn, I was a college student at the time, he had become the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And that committee was extremely powerful. We went into his office, sat down, and he said, "Ask me anything." I was wondering, in all this time he had been in Congress, by this time it had been nearly 40 years he had been a member of the House. I said, "Did you ever consider running for the Senate?" And he looked at me and he said, "I'm not interested in a demotion." And I was kind of taken aback by that. I didn't understand it at first, and he saw that and he explained it to me. And he was really the first one to kind of lay out how the seniority system worked in the House, how you gathered power and influence. And by that time, as I said, he was chairman of this very powerful committee. He had done a lot of good things. And he's just said to me, if I resigned or if I ran for the Senate, I would just be one of 100. I'd be a backbencher in the Senate and I'd have to start all over again. And so it dawned on me, yeah, okay, that's a good point. But it also dawned on me, this wasn't what the founders had in mind.
Representative Dingell didn't retire until 2015, serving nearly 6 decades in Congress and becoming the longest-serving member in history. At that point, he was replaced by his second wife, Debbie Dingell, who holds the same seat to this day, pushing the unbroken family dynasty closer to a century. With the sole exception of FDR, no president has served for more than 2 terms, and the 22nd Amendment was ratified by the states over 75 years ago. Why then have we let Congress off the hook? Prior to the 1900s, it wasn't just the executive branch that honored the founders' vision for rotation in office. It was the legislative branch as well. Since then, we have unquestionably witnessed the rise of a professionalized, insulated, unapproachable Congress, a permanent ruling class. During the 1880s, the average tenure for members of Congress was only 3 years. At the start of the most recent Congress, that number had tripled. Similarly, the average tenure for members of the Senate had doubled. This graph shows the share of representatives who did not seek re-election throughout American history. Prior to 1880, that number never fell below 25%, but since the 1900s, it has averaged roughly 11%. And while members like Senator Ted Cruz have repeatedly introduced an amendment for congressional term limits, something 80 to 90% of all Americans supports, it fails every time.
Our capital has too often become a political playground for the powerful and the well-connected, for members of the permanent political class looking to accumulate more and more power at the expense of American taxpayers.
It's a basic test of the health of our system of governance, and the results are abysmal. If not even 80-something% of the American people are enough to elicit a response from Congress, it seems our representative legislature is no longer deserving of that title. These professing public servants have held power for over 40 years, while the current average length of service for members of the House of Lords is only 14 years, a humiliating comparison considering our founders weren't exactly a fan of the British system of government. Federalists like Alexander Hamilton argued that the Constitution didn't need term limits because they wanted more experienced leaders to serve in government. But in a country dedicated to the people, the best experience doesn't come from wandering elite halls of power or consorting in smoke-filled rooms. It comes from living and breathing among the everyday Americans who make this country so exceptional. Of course, others argue that term limits will merely deflect power to unelected staffers and bureaucrats. But that's what makes Convention of States so unique. The Convention of States application isn't limited to members of Congress, but can apply to anyone who wields power over us in Washington. Aristocracy, wherever it may exist, is antithetical to the American way of life. No one should be permitted to rise above the American people, the true wellspring of power in this country. Appearances cannot be disregarded, Calvin Coolidge once said. Those in whom is placed the solemn duty of caring for others ought to think of themselves last, or their decisions will lack authority. It is of infinite importance to demonstrate that legislation is used not for the benefit of the legislator, but of the public. That is the heart of American governance. To restore that heart, we need to stop worshiping politicians and get back to the man who most powerfully exemplified servant leadership. If you want to be great in this country, it's a simple formula after all. Bend the knee, serve, and when your time is up, willingly accept your promotion to the highest office in the land. That's of an American citizen.